What is the primary purpose of the global arms industry? While most arms manufacturers provide material and weapons to their own governments, who subsidize them lavishly, the international trade in arms is about facilitating war crimes. In early February, the British government came under pressure from a range of sources to cancel arms contracts with the Saudi Arabian government, currently committing atrocities in Yemen. As The Guardian reported, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said, Yemen is in flames, and coalition airstrikes in particular continue to strike schools, hospitals, mosques, and civilian infrastructure. And he appealed to all governments currently selling arms to Saudi Arabia, principally the British, to cease and desist. The paper also reports that lawyers acting for the campaign against the arms trade say the sales are in breach of international law. In Parliament, the International Development Committee called for the suspension of the sales. But on the same day, Defence Secretary Michael Fallon was wined and dined by the arms industry, according to The Independent. The paper reports that on the evening in question, Fallon was attending a dinner of the Arms Lobby Group, the ADS Trade Association, who stated on social media that Mr. Fallon had provided tremendous support for its operations at the dinner. In a similar coincidence, the Globe and Mail reports that the same day that the UN issued a report condemning Saudi war crimes, Canadian officials were on a Middle East junket trying to flog weapons, including a $15 billion sale of weaponized armoured vehicles to Saudi Arabia. Arms sales to the Middle East are soaring. The Guardian reports that the top 5 purchases in the region, led by Saudi Arabia, now account for $18 billion in arms sales, up from $12 billion last year. Yet the major newspapers often seem curiously reticent about drawing any wider political conclusions from the flood of arms sales coming from the major exporters and ending up being used to blow up schools and hospitals. The Washington Post claims, ludicrously, that the Obama administration is keeping its distance from Saudi Arabia-Iran fight. There are 2 lies in that headline. The conflict is not simply between Saudi Arabia and Iran, but is part of an ongoing civil war inside Yemen, and the Obama administration has been bloodily involved in it from the start. In the UK, The Guardian's editorial on the subject, mystifyingly overlooking its own newspaper's reporting, suggests that there is no strong evidence that Britain or the United States are backing the Saudi Arabian push in Yemen in any full-hearted way. These claims would seem to be undermined by the years of drone strikes carried out by the US administration in Yemen and by the intelligence and logistical support which the New York Times reports the US is giving the Saudi campaign. In fact, the Washington Post is directly contradicting its own article on this war from last year, explaining the prominent role played not only by intelligence and logistical support, but also billions of dollars in advanced American-made weapons. So the arms industry is the major tool of intervention in this conflict on the part of the US and UK. It is vast and politically powerful, heavily subsidized and backed by aggressive diplomacy. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute estimates that the total value of the global arms trade in 2013 was at least $76 billion. Weapons sales after a decline in the post-Cold War period have sharply increased since the turn of the millennium, and leading the global increase is the United States, which makes up 31% of the international arms trade, closely followed by Russia at 27%, and whose global sales have increased by 23% in the decade leading up to 2014. As the Stockholm Institute said in a statement reported by the International Business Times, the USA has sold or donated major arms to at least 96 states in the past 5 years, and the US arms industry has large outstanding export orders, including for a total of 611 F-35 combat aircraft to 9 states. Part of the reason for the increase is that, as ProPublica reports, the Obama administration rolled back export controls so that military equipment could be sent to almost any country in the world with minimal oversight, even to some countries subject to UN arms embargoes. According to the BBC, the US and Russia are among the few countries not to have signed a global treaty prohibiting the sale of weapons to warlords, human rights abusers, terrorists, and criminal organizations. Why are governments so committed to the industry, and why is it all too often protected by a buffer of dissimulations in the media? First, let's take a look at some of the ways in which the media justify the government's arms investments. The main justification for the arms industry is that it's good for national security. As the Financial Times reports, the Ministry of Defence has drawn up a plan to boost exports and help keep the industry afloat. Because, as the Secretary of Defence argues, what is good for the economy is good for national security. Likewise, US officials routinely defend arms exports to Israel on similar grounds. As the Clinton campaign puts it, while committing to continue funding Israel's armed forces, if you challenge Israel's security, you challenge America's security. The logic of this is bizarre. In no sense is the national security of Britain or the US dependent on Saudi Arabia crushing Yemeni civil society any more than it is on the Egyptian dictatorship murdering its opposition or Israel destroying the Palestinians. Yet the defence industry often gets space in the newspapers to claim that its interests are those of national security. The Telegraph, for example, in its piece calling to ease controls of defence exports as UK sales of fighters and tanks decline, reports without criticism a claim by the arms lobby ADS that more money for arms would contribute to our national security, supporting prosperity and high-value jobs. This, however, has limited propaganda purchase. The arms industry can talk in vague terms about national security, but no one believes it when the arms are going straight to notorious war criminals and killers. The other main prism through which the media considers the issue of arms sales, then, is the choice that governments supposedly have to make between jobs and human rights. CNN, covering cuts to defence expenditure, gave uncritical publicity to a report by an arms industry lobby group claiming that more than 2 million jobs could be lost as a result of the cuts. The Telegraph, reporting on British government spending cuts, suggests that what it called defence exports, that's the arms trade, sustains 55,000 jobs in the UK. And the BBC, reporting on Trident and the debate about its replacement, claims that some 15,000 jobs are generated by Britain's nuclear weapons system. This figure, it must be said, belies the true figure disclosed by the Ministry of Defence as a result of a Freedom of Information Act request made by the CND. It turned out that the plant at Faslane only employs 520 people. David Cameron benefits from such claims as he has been able to justify the ongoing military support for the Saudi regime's war in Yemen by claiming that, as The Guardian reports, 30,000 jobs in the UK were at stake in such sales. Even when the issue is framed in this way, there is significant popular opposition to the arms industry. Despite the fear-mongering about job losses in Scotland if Trident is lost, polling shows that most Scottish people oppose renewing it. In Canada, where the government has invoked the jobs argument to resist pressure to stop arms sales to the Gulf, the Globe and Mail reports that most Canadians rank human rights above job creation. In fact, however, that isn't the choice. As the Watson Institute at Brown University points out, military spending creates fewer jobs than the same amount of money would have if invested in other sectors. Clean energy and healthcare spending create 50% more jobs than the equivalent amount of spending on the military. Education spending creates more than twice as many jobs. Time magazine reports the same finding from the Centre for International Policy, which points out that military spending is less effective at creating jobs than virtually any other form of government activity. The Campaign Against the Arms Trade, in a report titled Arms to Renewables, points out that investing the funds spent on arms manufacturing in offshore wind and tidal power would generate over 200,000 jobs in total. Despite what media outlets regularly claim then, the money spent on arms exports is a net loss to jobs and an economic drain. So why do governments insist on investing in weapons and engaging in aggressive diplomacy to sell them? And what explains the media's reticence in disclosing the full facts? Part of the reason is that government officials have a privileged relationship to weapons manufacturers. The Guardian reported in 2012 how senior officials in the Ministry of Defence move swiftly onto top jobs in the arms industry once their government posts expire. A revolving door, as the paper puts it. The same pattern applies in the US, where a revolving door links the Pentagon and private military contractors, the most famous example being Dick Cheney, who went from Defence Secretary to CEO of Halliburton to Vice President. And despite laws regulating this, the Washington Post reports that in 2008, the Government Accountability Office found that 52 of the biggest defence contractors employed 2,435 former generals, senior executives and acquisition officers. Sometimes, as Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting points out in a report on the military-industrial media complex, those ties bind the media. NBC, one of America's major television networks, is owned by General Electric, one of the largest suppliers of weapons to the Pentagon. But even where there isn't a direct economic link, arms industries provide broadcasters and newspapers with ready-to-hand raft of experts to discuss policy. The Washington Post reported in 2013 that according to the Public Accountability Initiative, military analysts who made frequent media appearances during the recent debate over a possible US strike on Syria have ties to defence contractors. But it goes deeper than these connections. As Nicholas Gilby, author of the No-Nonsense Guide to the Arms Trade, points out, having major arms industries gives states power and international prestige. It also gives them a means of intervening in wars and propping up dictatorships while remaining plausibly deniable. And that is a routine in which the establishment media are all too happy to collaborate.